Created to fear her own body, she ran from pleasure. But the millionaire's gaze pierced through everything she thought was true. When he saw her for the first time, he knew he would never let her go. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment saying where you are listening from. Emily Parker never knew that silence could hurt as much as screams. She grew up between walls of peeling wood and whispered prayers, where every movement was watched, every breath measured as sin or virtue. The religious community where she spent. Her childhood was hidden in rural Tennessee, a place where time seemed suspended between the fear of God and the fear of the men who spoke in his name. Her father, Joseph Parker, was the spiritual leader of those simple, haunted people. A tall man, thin as a dried branch, who preached about the purity of the soul while his eyes traveled over women's bodies with a hunger that Emily learned to recognize before she even understood what it meant. He said that the daughters of Eve were born marked by original sin, and that only through penance and pain could they redeem themselves. Emily learned not to touch herself, not just in the carnal sense that he preached about so vehemently, but literally. Her hands were disciplined not to explore her own body, not to caress her own hair, not to slide over her arms when no one was watching. Touch was forbidden, even self-touch, especially self-touch. Her mother, Lucy, was a pale shadow who glided through the house like a ghost. There were old photos of her hidden in the bottom of a dusty drawer, a young woman with bright eyes and a wide smile, wearing a blue dress that accentuated her silhouette. But that Lucy had died long before the body withered. What remained was a broken creature who whispered prayers while peeling potatoes, who cried silently during her husband's sermons, who looked at Emily sometimes as if she were seeing a ghost. At 17, Emily found her mother unconscious in the yard, foam at her mouth, convulsing among the frightened chickens. Joseph said it was demonic possession, that she needed more prayers, more fasting, more penance. But Emily saw the empty medicine bottles hidden under her mother's mattress, saw the confused notes scribbled in the margins of the Bible, words that made no sense, numbers that led nowhere. Lucy was admitted to a psychiatric clinic in Nashville, diagnosed with schizophrenia. Joseph told the community that she had been taken by angels, that she was healed and living in peace. Emily knew it was a lie, but she learned that questioning her father's truth was questioning God himself. She visited her mother in secret, hitchhiking with truckers who passed along the dusty road. Lucy recognized her on some days. On others, she looked through her as if she were transparent. During one of those visits, a few months before she died, her mother held her hand with surprising strength and whispered, "He's looking for you, daughter. The man in the portrait. Be careful what you inherited from me." Emily never understood what that meant, what portrait, what inheritance, but she stored the words away like she stored everything she couldn't comprehend in a dark corner of her heart, along with the questions she could never ask aloud. When Joseph died of a heart attack at 62, during a particularly inflamed sermon about the dangers of the flesh, Emily felt something she couldn't name. It wasn't relief, it wasn't sadness. It was a kind of immense emptiness, as if a door had opened to a place she didn't know if she wanted to explore. The community dissolved quickly without its leader. The families scattered, each carrying their fears and wounds to other places. Emily remained alone in the empty house, among dust-covered furniture and the echo of prayers that no one prayed anymore. It was then that she made the most courageous decision of her life. She sold everything she had, the house, the furniture, even her father's Bible, and bought a bus ticket to Chicago. At 23, carrying only a small suitcase, a notebook where she wrote her thoughts and her mother's old crucifix, she left behind the only life she had ever known. Chicago swallowed her like a gigantic monster of concrete and smoke. In the first days, she slept in cheap hostels, ate bologna sandwiches, walked the streets without knowing where to go. The city was a labyrinth of strange sounds, unfamiliar smells, people who talked too fast and looked through her as if she didn't exist. She found work at a cleaning company, then at a bakery, then as a clerk at a clothing store downtown. No job lasted very long. Emily had difficulty looking people in the eye, spoke too quietly, was invisible in a way that irritated employers. They wanted employees who smiled, who sold, who seduced customers. Emily only knew how to disappear. It was on a rainy Tuesday, in March, that Emily saw the ad in the used newspaper she found abandoned at the bus stop. North Golden Capital seeks temporary administrative assistant, experience not required. The address was on Michigan Avenue, an area of the city she knew only by name, where the buildings touched the sky and people wore clothes that cost more than her 6-month salary. Emily had no experience, no college degree, not even proper clothes, for an interview. But something in the ad called to her. Perhaps it was the word temporary, which required no commitment, or perhaps it was the desperation of someone who was in her last month of overdue rent. She spent her last savings on a simple black skirt and a white blouse, pulled her brown hair back in a tight bun, and presented herself at the mirrored building that rose like a glass tower against the grey sky. The receptionist, a blonde woman, with red nails and a professional smile, looked Emily up and down with an expression she knew well, that mixture of pity and disdain that people reserved for those who clearly didn't belong there. But there were open positions, and Emily was hired on the same day to start the following Monday. North Golden Capital occupied 15 floors of the building, each more luxurious than the last. Emily was assigned to the 10th floor, Human Resources Department, where her job was to file documents, organize folders, and answer phones. The work was simple, mechanical, exactly the kind of invisibility she excelled at. Her colleagues, young made-up women who talked about clubs and boyfriends during lunch hour, treated her with polite but distant courtesy. For 3 months, Emily was just another anonymous employee among hundreds. She arrived at 8 in the morning, ate lunch alone in the food court of the nearby mall, left at 5 in the afternoon. She never arrived late, never missed a day, never caused problems. She was perfect in her mediocrity, exactly as she had learned to be. It was on a Thursday in June that everything changed. Emily was organizing files when an office boy appeared at her desk with a folded note. Expensive paper, cream-colored, with the company's golden crest in the upper corner. Inside, handwritten in an elegant and masculine calligraphy, "Report to the 36th floor interview room now." The 36th floor was a legend in the company, the top floor of the building, inaccessible to most employees, where the executive board's offices were located. Emily had never gone above the 20th floor, when she needed to deliver documents to the legal department. The elevator that led to the top required a special card, which she didn't have. The office boy accompanied her, passing his card over the sensor. During the ascent, Emily felt her stomach knot, not just from the elevator's speed, but from growing anxiety. Why had they called her? Had she made a mistake? Would she be fired? Her hands were sweating as she smoothed her wrinkled skirt. The 36th floor was another world. Italian marble floor, walls covered in fine wood, works of art that Emily couldn't identify, but that radiated elegance and money. The silence was different there, dense, respectful, almost sacred. Even the air seemed thinner. An impeccable secretary of undefined age and aristocratic bearing led her down a long corridor to a glass room at the end. "Wait here," she said simply, closing the door as she left. Emily was left alone in the spacious room with a mahogany table in the center and genuine leather chairs. The walls were covered with shelves full of books with golden spines, titles in English, French, languages she didn't recognize. One of the walls was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of Chicago that took her breath away. The city stretched as far as the eye could see, an ocean of buildings and lights that were beginning to flicker in the late afternoon. She waited for 20 minutes, then 30. She was beginning to think there had been some mistake when the door opened. The man who entered wasn't what she expected. She had imagined someone older, paunchy, with the air of a typical executive. Alexander Morrison was 42 but looked younger. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair with a few grey strands at the temples. He wore a tailored suit that enhanced his athletic silhouette, but it was his eyes that paralyzed her. Grey like molten lead, intense in a way that made her feel naked. He didn't introduce himself, didn't extend his hand, didn't offer any social courtesy. He simply observed her in silence for long seconds that seemed eternal. Emily lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You're Emily Parker," he finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Daughter of Lucy Mendez Parker." Emily raised her eyes, surprised. How did he know her mother's name, she wanted to ask, but the words died in her throat under that penetrating gaze. "You'll be my new personal assistant," he said, walking to the window, without taking his eyes off her. "You'll start Monday, 8 o'clock, leaving at 8 at night. Salary 5 times higher than what you currently receive." Emily blinked, trying to process the information. 5 times more. It was impossible. There had to be some mistake. "Mr. Morrison, I don't have experience as a personal assistant. I think there's been a mistake." He turned to her with a fluid, predatory movement. "There's been no mistake, Emily. May I call you Emily?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Excellent. You don't need experience, just dedication." The way he said the word made something strange happen in her lower abdomen, a sensation she had never experienced. Hot, unsettling, forbidden. On the following Monday, Emily discovered that being Alexander Morrison's personal assistant meant inhabiting a completely new world. Her desk was in an elegant anteroom adjacent to his office, a space that breathed discreet luxury and silent power. Persian rugs covered the marble floor, paintings by artists she didn't know decorated the walls, and the silence was broken only by the soft ticking of an antique clock. Her duties, at least initially, seemed simple, managing Alex's schedule, filtering calls, organizing meetings. But she soon realized there were deeper layers to the job. Alex was meticulous to the point of obsession. He wanted her to note not just appointments, but the mood of the people he met with, seemingly insignificant details about their reactions, gestures, even the way they drank coffee. "Observe everything," he said one morning, when she brought documents for him to sign. "People reveal themselves in the details they believe don't matter." Emily began to understand that he wasn't just a businessman. He was a student of human behavior, an elegant predator who collected information the way others collected art. And she, without fully understanding, had become his hands and eyes. What disturbed her most was the attention he paid to her. Alex never touched her, not even the formal greeting of shaking hands, but his presence was constant in subtle ways. He knew when she had eaten lunch and what, commented on the book she carried in her purse, noticed when she changed her hairstyle or wore a different lipstick. "You should wear more blue," he said one day, almost absently, while reviewing contracts. "It suits your skin." The next day, Emily found a navy blue silk blouse hanging in the anteroom closet with a note, "To wear when you wish." The piece was from an expensive French brand, exactly her size, cut to flatter her silhouette without being vulgar. Emily stood looking at the blouse for long minutes, her heart racing. It was beautiful, more elegant than any clothing she had ever owned, but accepting it seemed to cross an invisible line whose contours she couldn't quite define. She put the blouse in the closet and continued wearing her simple clothes. Alex didn't comment, but she saw him look at the closed closet with an indecipherable expression. The weeks passed in a strange routine. Emily learned his tastes: double espresso without sugar, meetings always scheduled at odd hours, preference for Mont Blanc pens with blue ink. She also learned his moods: the concentrated silence when he was analyzing numbers, the way his fingers drummed on the table when he was irritated, the way his eyes narrowed when someone tried to deceive him. But the more she observed him, the more questions arose. Why had he chosen her? How did he know her mother? And why, when he thought she wasn't looking, did his eyes fix on her with an intensity that made her feel like a butterfly pinned in a collection? It was on a Friday in July that Emily noticed the first significant change in her routine. Alex cancelled all his afternoon meetings and said she could leave at 5, as usual. But when she reached the building's parking lot, she found a uniformed driver waiting for her next to a black BMW. "Miss Emily, Mr. Morrison asked me to drive you home." She wanted to protest, but the driver had already opened the rear door with a deference that allowed no refusal. During the silent journey through Chicago's heavy traffic, Emily wondered how Alex knew her address. She had never given personal information beyond what was required by human resources. On Saturday, she woke to the sound of hammers and drills coming from the apartment next door. The building manager explained that structural problems had arisen in her apartment, leaks, electrical wiring issues, and that she would need to move temporarily. But there was already a solution. A furnished apartment in the same building, 3 floors up, immediately available at no additional cost. Emily went up to see the new apartment, and her jaw dropped. It was 3 times larger than hers, with elegant furniture, a complete modern kitchen, a balcony with a view of the city, and in the center of the living room, imposing and impossible to ignore, a white grand piano that gleamed like a jewel under the natural light. She had never mentioned to anyone that she knew how to play the piano. It was a childhood secret, the hidden lessons a teacher from the community gave her when her father wasn't watching, the few moments of pure beauty amid constant repression. In that moment, Emily understood with crystal clarity that none of this was coincidence. The driver, the apartment, the piano, all orchestrated by Alex with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony. But why? And how far was he willing to go? She sat at the piano bench, her fingers trembling as they touched the ivory keys. The music that came out was melancholic, laden with a longing she didn't know she carried. And as she played, she had the strange sensation that someone was watching her, that her notes were lost in the night air of Chicago, carrying a message to ears that waited in silence. On Monday, when she arrived at the office, Alex was standing at the window, hands crossed behind his back. He didn't turn when she entered, but said in the softest voice she had ever heard, "You play Chopin beautifully." Emily felt her blood freeze. How did he know? The apartment was far from the office. The buildings didn't have a view of each other. How do you know I play piano?" she asked, her voice coming out firmer than she expected. Alex finally turned, and there was something different in his eyes, something more vulnerable, more dangerous. "Because I was listening," he said, simply. "Because I'm always listening, Emily. The question is, when will you stop pretending you don't know that?" Alex's words echoed in Emily's mind for days. "I'm always listening." The phrase carried layers of meaning she couldn't fully decipher, but which made her feel a disturbing mixture of fear and excitement. It was as if he had admitted to something forbidden, a veiled confession that irrevocably changed the nature of the relationship between them. In the days that followed, Emily became hyper-aware of every movement. She knew he was watching her, not just in the office but in ways that transcended physical boundaries. When she played piano at night, she felt his presence like an invisible shadow. When she walked on the apartment balcony, the wind seemed to carry whispers. When she woke in the middle of the night, she had the impression that someone had just left the room. The work routine gradually intensified. Alex began asking her to stay beyond regular hours, to finalize important reports or prepare urgent presentations. There was always a plausible reason, but Emily noticed the pattern. The later they stayed, the emptier the building became, the more intimate the atmosphere between them grew. It was during these moments that she saw him without his social masks. Alex relaxed his suit, loosened his tie, ran his hands through his hair in a way that revealed a carefully hidden vulnerability during the day. Sometimes he talked about business, explaining complex strategies that she pretended to fully understand. Other times they simply worked in silence, but it was a silence charged with electricity, like the air before a storm. It was on one of these extended nights that Emily noticed something different. Alex had gone out for an external meeting, and she was alone in the office organizing documents when she heard music coming from somewhere on the floor. Piano. The notes were melancholic, executed with perfect technique, but with a deep sadness. That made her stop what she was doing. She followed the sound down the silent corridor to a half-open door she had never noticed before. She peeked inside and saw him. Alex was sitting at a black grand piano, still wearing his dress shirt but without the jacket, sleeves rolled up revealing muscular forearms. His fingers danced across the keys with a dexterity that surprised her. The music he played was the same Chopin piece she had performed in the apartment days before. Emily was paralyzed. There was something deeply intimate about the scene, as if she were spying on a sacred moment. Alex played with his eyes closed, lost in the music, and for the first time she saw him completely disarmed. When the last note faded in the air, he remained motionless for long seconds, his hands still resting on the keyboard. "You can come in," he said, without opening his eyes or turning around. "I know you're there." Emily hesitated, her heart racing at having been discovered, but something in his voice reassured her. There was no irritation, just a kind of melancholic resignation. "I'm sorry," she murmured, entering the room. "I heard the music and—" "You don't need to apologize." He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes seemed darker in the soft light of the room. "This is my music room, my private refuge." Emily looked around. The room was smaller than the main office, more welcoming. Shelves with sheet music, some old photographs on the walls, a worn leather sofa that suggested frequent use. It was the first space she had seen there that seemed truly inhabited, personal. "You play very well," she said, approaching cautiously. "My mother taught me." There was an old pain in those words. She used to say that music was the only truly universal language, that two people could communicate through it even without knowing each other. Emily felt something move in her chest. "Is your mother still—" "She died when I was 15. He ran his fingers over the keys in a melancholic sequence. "Cancer, quick and cruel." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. More charged, more honest. Emily moved closer, and Alex slid on the bench, making room for her to sit beside him. The proximity was disturbing. She could feel the heat emanating. From him, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something more primitive, more masculine. "Play with me," he said, starting a simple melody. 4 hands. Emily hesitated. Playing piano with someone required a special intimacy, a synchronization that went beyond technique. But her fingers moved almost of their own will, finding the harmony for his melody. For a few magical minutes, they were just two musicians, exploring a language that transcended words. When the music ended, they remained motionless, their hands still on the keyboard, their bodies so close that she could feel his breath on her neck. The moment stretched dangerously, loaded with unspoken possibilities. "Emily," murmured Alex, and there was something new in his voice, something vulnerable and hungry at the same time. She turned to look at him and found his eyes fixed on hers, with an intensity that made her tremble. Slowly, as if afraid of startling her, he raised one of his hands and touched her face. Just a touch, his fingers sliding along the line of her jaw with an almost religious reverence. "You're exactly as I imagined," he whispered. "As you imagined." Her voice came out weak, breathless. Instead of answering, Alex leaned in slightly, his lips approaching hers. Emily closed her eyes, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. She could feel his breath against her skin, could taste the promise of that kiss. And then he pulled away abruptly, rising from the bench, as if he had been burned. "It's late," he said, his voice controlled, professional again. "You should go home." Emily sat stunned by the sudden change, by the almost kiss that didn't happen. "Alex, Please," he said without turning. "Go." She left the room in silence, but as she waited for the elevator, she heard the sound of the piano again. The music he was playing now was different, more desperate, more painful, like a man fighting demons only he could see. After the almost kiss in the music room, the dynamic between Emily and Alex changed in a subtle but undeniable way. He became more distant during the day, keeping conversations strictly professional, avoiding prolonged eye contact. But Emily noticed the contradictions, the prolonged pauses when she entered his office, the way his eyes followed her when she walked across the room, the times she caught him looking at her hands with an indecipherable expression. She was changing too. The body she had learned to hide began to claim space. She felt more aware of her own skin, of how clothes adjusted to her curves, of the way her hair slipped over her shoulders when she let down her bun at the end of the day. It was as if Alex had awakened something dormant in her, a sensuality that had been repressed by years of religious doctrine. One night, 3 weeks after the incident at the piano, Emily worked later than usual, finalizing a complex report on international acquisitions. The building was practically empty, only a few security guards on the lower floors and the cleaning crew working in already vacant offices. When she finally finished, it was already past 10 at night. She put the documents in the appropriate folder and headed to the elevator, but discovered that she needed a special card to go down after business hours, a security measure she was unaware of. She tried to call the reception desk, but couldn't get an outside line from the desk phone. It was then that she remembered Alex was still in the building. His meetings with Asian investors extended into the late hours due to the time difference. She would have to ask him for help, as uncomfortable as that might be. She walked through the silent corridors to his main office, but the room was empty. The light, however, was on, and she could hear the sound of running water coming from somewhere nearby. She remembered that there was a private suite attached to the office, a space she had never entered, intended for extremely confidential meetings or rest during long trips. She hesitated for a moment, then knocked lightly on the suite door. There was no response. The sound of water continued. Now she identified it as being from a shower. Alex must have been refreshing himself after a long session of exercise. She had noticed the gym equipment that was sometimes delivered to his room. "Mr. Morrison?" she called, raising her voice to be heard over the sound of water. Silence. Then the shower noise stopped abruptly. "Emily?" His voice came muffled, surprised. "Sorry to bother you. I'm locked in the building and need your card to go down." 1 moment. Emily waited, nervous, hearing movements inside the suite. When the door opened, the air escaped from her lungs in a silent sigh. Alex was wearing only a white towel tied at the waist. Drops of water ran down his bare chest, over the defined muscles of his shoulders and arms. His wet hair was stuck to his forehead, and he observed her with an expression that mixed surprise and something much darker. Emily tried to look away, but it was impossible. She had never seen a man like that, naked, vulnerable, completely masculine. His body was a work of art, sculpted by years of discipline and exercise, but there were small scars here and there that suggested a life not entirely privileged. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her cheeks on fire. "I didn't know you were... It's... all right." His voice was hoarse. "Come in, I need to get the card." Emily hesitated but entered the suite. It was a sophisticated space with a sitting area, a smaller work desk, and through a half-open door she could see a large, impeccably made bed. Alex moved through the room with feline grace, showing no embarrassment at his semi-nudity. He took the card from a side table and approached her to hand it over. The distance between them reduced until Emily could feel the heat emanating from his still damp skin. "Here it is," he said, extending the card. When Emily reached out to take it, their fingers touched. It was an electric contact, which made both of them freeze. Alex didn't release the card and she didn't withdraw her hand. They remained like this for seconds that seemed eternal, connected by that simple touch, but laden with meaning. "Emily," he murmured, and there was an unformulated question in his voice. She raised her eyes to meet his. There was desire there, yes, but also something like pain. As if he were fighting against himself, against impulses that threatened to destroy some carefully constructed plan. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice coming out braver than she felt. "Really?" Alex let out a trembling breath. His free hand rose slowly, as he had done in the music room, and touched her face with a delicacy that contrasted with the tension in his muscles. "Everything," he whispered. "I want everything." The confession hung in the air between them like a dangerous promise. Emily felt something awaken in her lower abdomen, a primitive need she had never experienced. She leaned slightly against his hand and saw Alex's pupils dilate in response. But then, as on the night of the piano, he pulled away abruptly. "You need to go," he said, his voice rough. "Now." Emily took the card, confused and frustrated. "Why do you always do this? Why do you always pull away when... Because you don't know what you're asking for." His eyes were dark, almost wild. "Because if I don't stop now, I won't be able to stop later." "And what if I don't want you to stop?" The question came out before she could censor herself. Alex closed his eyes as if he had been punched. You don't know what you're saying. Then explain it to me. Tell me why you chose me, why you know my mother's name, why you're changing my entire life without asking me. Emily took a step toward him, emboldened by her own daring. Tell me what you really want from me. Alex opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. You want to know the truth, Emily? Do you really want to know? She nodded, her heart racing. Then come back here tomorrow night alone and I'll show you things about yourself, about your family, about me, that will forever change the way you see the world. The promise sounded like both a threat and an invitation. Emily left the suite with trembling legs, but her mind was more awake than ever. Whatever truth Alex was guarding, she needed to know it, even if it meant crossing a line from which there might be no return. Emily spent the following day in silent agony. Each hour dragged like a century. Each routine task seemed absurdly trivial in the face of the promise Alex had made. I'll show you things that will forever change the way you see the world. And the words echoed in her mind like a disturbing mantra. Alex behaved absolutely normally during the day, professional, courteous, distant. If it weren't for the occasional intensity of his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking, Emily could have imagined that the scene from the night before had been a feverish dream. At 6 in the evening, he announced that he would be going out to dinner with investors and wouldn't return until later. He said this looking directly at her, and Emily understood the message. She would have time to decide if she really wanted to know the truth. At 8 o'clock, Emily found herself in front of the elevator that led to the 36th floor, her heart beating like an offbeat drum. She had spent 2 hours walking the streets of Chicago, trying to find the courage to return or the sense to leave. But curiosity, and something deeper, more dangerous, had won. The floor was bathed in a soft penumbra when she arrived. Only a few discreet lamps illuminated the corridor, creating pockets of light and shadow that gave the environment an almost sacred air. Alex's office was lit, the door half open like an invitation. Emily. His voice came from inside the room. She pushed the door and found him sitting behind the mahogany desk, wearing a dark dress shirt, no tie. There was a bottle of red wine open on the table, 2 glasses, one of them already served. You came, he said, and there was something like relief in his voice. I said I would. Alex gestured to the chair in front of the desk. Sit, drink some wine, you'll need it. Emily accepted the glass with trembling hands. The wine was full-bodied, expensive, and burned gently as it went down her throat. Alex observed her with that familiar intensity, but there was something different in his eyes, a somber resolution as if he were about to cross a precipice. Where should I begin? He murmured, more to himself than to her. At the beginning, said Emily, trying to keep her voice steady, why you know me, why you know my mother's name. Alex stood up and walked to a discreet cabinet on the wall. From inside, he removed an old leather folder tied with a cord. He returned to the desk and placed it in front of Emily. Open it, he said simply. With trembling fingers, Emily untied the cord and opened the folder. What she saw made her lose the air in her lungs. Photographs, dozens of them. Her mother, young, radiant, wearing elegant dresses that Emily had never seen. Lucy at balls, dinners, social events, always accompanied by a tall, imposing man with graying hair. In the last photos, she wore a blue dress that accentuated a slightly rounded belly. My father, said Alex, pointing to the man in the photographs. Edward Morrison. And your mother, Lucy. They were lovers for 3 years. Emily turned the photographs with trembling hands. There were letters, too, written in her mother's delicate handwriting, words of love, promises, pleas. And in one of them, the revelation that made Emily's world crumble. Edward, I need to tell you about our daughter. She was pregnant with you, said Alex, his voice soft but relentless. My father was married, had a reputation to protect. He offered money for her to disappear, to raise you far away from here. Lucy refused. She wanted recognition, wanted you to be registered as a Morrison. Emily felt as if she were drowning. This means that we are half-siblings, he completed, and there was real pain in his voice. You're my sister, Emily. Illegitimate daughter, but sister nonetheless. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily looked at the photographs, again searching for denial, but the resemblance was undeniable. The same grey eyes as Alex, the same line of the jaw, the same natural elegance she had always wondered where she had inherited from. "That's why you brought me here," she murmured, her voice dead. "That's why you knew me. You wanted to see your illegitimate sister." "No," said Alex, and there was urgency in his voice. "That's not why." He stood up again and took another folder, smaller, newer. "There's more, Emily, and this part is about me." She opened the second folder and found medical reports, legal documents, private investigations, all dated from the last 5 years. "After my father died, I found these photographs in his safe," explained Alex. "I became obsessed with finding out what had happened to Lucy, to her daughter. I hired investigators, tracked you to that religious community in Tennessee." Emily. Read the reports, each word a stab. Details about her childhood, about the psychological abuses she had suffered, about her mother's mental deterioration, about her escape to Chicago. "You spied on me for years," she said, her voice laden with betrayal. "I wanted to protect you," he said, coming closer. "I wanted to make sure you were well, that you had opportunities. Then why didn't you approach me sooner? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Alex stopped in front of her, his grey eyes tormented. "Because the moment I first saw you 5 years ago through the investigators' photos, I knew." "Knew what?" His answer came in a harsh whisper. "That I don't love you as a brother, Emily. I love you as a man loves a woman. I desire you in a way that's wrong, forbidden, sick." The world spun around Emily. The revelations accumulated like stones, burying her under the weight of the impossible truth. "You're sick," she murmured. "Yes," he admitted without hesitation. "I am. For 5 years I've lived with this obsession. I brought you close because I couldn't stay away anymore. I control your life because it's the only way I feel connected to you, and I know it's wrong. I know I'm a monster, but—" He knelt before her, taking her hands with a desperation that frightened her. "But I love you, Emily. I love you in a way that will destroy me, but I can't stop." Emily stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair behind her. The noise echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. Alex remained kneeling, his eyes fixed on her with a devastating vulnerability that somehow made everything even more disturbing. "You're sick," she repeated, but now with more conviction, more anger. "This thing you feel, this thing you're doing, it's disgusting." Alex closed his eyes as if he had been slapped. "I know." "No, you don't know," Emily shouted, years of repression exploding all at once. "You have no idea what it's like to grow up thinking you're a monster for feeling anything. You don't know what it's like to have a father who teaches you that desire is sin, that your own body is dirty, wrong." She walked around the room like a caged beast, her hands shaking. "And now you tell me that we're siblings? That you spied on me, manipulated me, brought me close because I love you," he finished, his voice broken. "This isn't love." Emily turned to him, her eyes shining with tears of anger. "This is obsession, this is control, this is—" She stopped, breathing heavily. A terrible part of herself, a part that she desperately tried to silence, whispered a truth she couldn't face. That she felt something for him too. That the moments of tension between them had awakened sensations she had never experienced. That, even knowing the truth now, her body still reacted to his presence. "I'm leaving," she said finally. "I'm going to leave this company, this city. I don't want to see you anymore." "Please," said Alex, still kneeling, "give me a chance to explain everything." "Explain what?" "That you seduced me knowing I'm your sister. That you financed the community. That destroyed my mother. Because that's what you did, isn't it?" Alex's silence was answer enough. "My God," murmured Emily, "you really did that. You kept that place running, kept my mother trapped there, kept me trapped." "It wasn't like that," he said, slowly rising. "When I discovered where you were, I wanted to get you both out of there immediately. But your mother, Lucy, she was very mentally ill. The doctors said that a sudden change could make her worse. So you decided for us? I was trying to protect you. By lying, by manipulating. Emily approached him, her index finger jabbed into his chest. You're not a protector, Alex. You're a predator. The words hit their mark. Alex paled, backing away as if he had been physically assaulted. Maybe you're right, he said, his voice low. Maybe I am exactly that. Emily observed him for a long moment. There was something in his defeated posture that made her hesitate. Even with all the anger, all the revolt, a part of her recognized the genuine pain in his eyes. Prove it, she said finally. What? If you really love me. If it's not just sick obsession, prove it. Let me go, now forever. Alex stared at her for long seconds. Then, slowly, he walked to the desk and picked up a golden key. This key opens a room in my penthouse, he said, extending it to her. A room that I prepared, thinking of you. There are things there that you need to see before deciding if you really want to leave forever. Emily looked at the key as if it were a venomous snake. What kind of things? Things about your mother. About what really happened between her and my father. About why she went insane. Alex approached slowly, as if she were a wild animal ready to flee. There's a woman you need to meet, someone who can tell you the complete truth. What woman? Stella. Morrison, my ex-wife. Emily felt her blood freeze. Ex-wife? I thought she had died. Everyone thinks that. But she's alive, admitted to a private clinic, and she knew your mother, Emily. They corresponded. The revelation hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. That's impossible. Go to the room, see for yourself, read the letters you'll find there. And then, if you still want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll give you enough money to start over wherever you want, far away from me. Emily took the key with trembling fingers. It was heavy, ornate, obviously old. And if I can't forgive you? If all this is irreparable? Alex smiled, but it was the saddest smile she had ever seen. Then I'll learn to live with that pain because it's the least I deserve. Emily put the key in her purse and headed for the door, but before leaving she turned one last time. Alex? Yes? If you're lying about anything, if there are more secrets, more manipulations, I'll destroy you. I don't know how, but I'll find a way. He nodded gravely. I know. And it would be fair. Emily left the office without looking back, but she could feel his eyes, following her to the elevator. As she descended the 36 floors, she pressed the key into her palm until the physical pain matched the emotional one. She had spent her entire life running from painful truths. This time, as terrifying as it might be, she would face them head-on. Even if it meant discovering that love and horror could coexist in the same human heart. Even if it meant accepting that perhaps she was as disturbed as he was. Because, despite everything, despite the shocking revelation about them being siblings, a dark part of her soul still vibrated in his presence. And that was the most frightening truth of all. Emily spent 3 days avoiding the golden key. It sat on the nightstand of the apartment like a silent accusation, constantly reminding her of the revelations that had destroyed her understanding of herself and the world. During the day, she immersed herself in work with a manic intensity, trying to keep her mind occupied. During the night, she stayed awake at the piano, playing melancholic pieces until her hands hurt. Alex respected her need for space. He didn't appear at the office during those 3 days, communicating only through formal notes left on her desk. Work instructions, nothing personal. But Emily knew he was in the building. She could feel him as a constant presence, a gravity that pulled her even when she tried to resist. On the 4th morning, she woke with crystal clarity. She needed to see what was in the locked room, not because she trusted Alex, but because curiosity was corroding her like acid. If there were more truths to be discovered, she preferred to know them all at once, however painful they might be. The building where Alex lived was in Lincoln Park, a restored Art Deco building that breathed discreet elegance and old money. The doorman recognized her, another sign that her life had been observed and catalogued long before she realized. and directed her to the private elevator that led directly to the penthouse. The penthouse was a perfect reflection of Alex, sophisticated, impeccable, but with a coldness that suggested more admiration than habitation. Designer furniture, carefully selected works of art, a panoramic view of Chicago that took one's breath away, but it lacked soul, human warmth. Emily found the locked room at the end of a silent corridor. The golden key slid smoothly into the lock, as if it had been used recently. When the door opened, she had to hold onto the door frame to keep from falling. The room was a sanctuary, or a mausoleum. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, chronologically organized, like an exhibition. Her mother at different times of life, smiling child, shy teenager, radiant young woman in the arms of Alex's father, pregnant and luminous, then increasingly thin, more haunted, until the last images that she recognized from the religious community. But there were other photographs too. Emily as a child, playing in the community's yard. Emily as a teenager, helping with household chores. Emily as an adult, walking through the streets of Chicago, sitting on park benches, entering and leaving jobs. Years of discreet surveillance, documented in images she didn't know existed. And then there were the clothes, an entire wardrobe of women's clothing, all in her size, organized by color and occasion. Dresses she had never worn, but that seemed to have been chosen specifically for her. Shoes that perfectly matched her feet, delicate jewelry that would enhance her skin. In the center of the room, on a mahogany table, was a box of red velvet. Inside, an antique necklace with a heart-shaped pendant and a folded letter with her name written in her mother's familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, Emily unfolded the letter. "My dear Emily, if you are reading this, it means you have finally discovered the truth about your origin. I hope you can forgive me for not telling you while I was alive, but Edward made me promise to keep it secret. He was afraid of what society would say, of what it would do to his legitimate family. But you need to know he loved you. In the last years of his life, he bitterly regretted not having recognized you as his daughter. This necklace belonged to his mother, and he wanted it to be yours. There is an inheritance too, a bank account in your name managed by Alex until you turned 25. Edward wanted to ensure that you would never want for anything. There is something else you need to know, something about Alex. He is not your brother, Emily. Edward was not your biological father. Your mother lied, Emily." Read the phrase 3 times before she could process the meaning. Her legs gave way and she fell sitting on the bed, the letter trembling in her hands. "I discovered I was pregnant shortly after meeting Edward, but the baby was from another man, someone from the religious community who forced me when I was very young. Edward fell in love with me and said it didn't matter, that he would raise you as his own daughter. But when you were born and I saw your eyes so different from ours, I knew he suspected the truth. That's why I left Emily. I couldn't continue lying to a man who loved me so much. I took you far away so he would never discover that he had been deceived, that he had fallen in love with a dirty, used woman. Forgive me for this lie. Forgive me for letting you grow up in that terrible place. But I had no choice. I didn't have the strength to fight. You are not a Morrison, my daughter. You are free to love whoever you want, to be whoever you want. Use that freedom better than I used mine." Emily let the letter fall to the floor, her mind spinning in vertiginous circles. She was not Alex's sister. She had never been. His obsession wasn't incestuous, it was just obsession. But there was another letter on the table, this one in Alex's handwriting. "Emily, if you're reading this, you found your mother's letter. I discovered the truth 2 years ago, through DNA tests I had done secretly. You are not my sister, but I couldn't tell you because that would mean admitting that my feelings for you weren't wrong in the way I thought, but were still wrong in other ways. I manipulated you, controlled you, brought you close based on a lie. And even knowing now that we are not relatives, that doesn't erase what I did. It doesn't justify the way I invaded your life. There is a person who can explain better than I can. Stella is at St. Raphael's Clinic in Lake Geneva. She met your mother in her final years. They corresponded in secret. She knows things about the past that even I don't know. If you want to see her, you'll find the address and all the necessary arrangements in the desk drawer. If you don't want to, I'll respect your decision. Just one more thing, I love you, Emily. Not in the sick way I thought for years, but in a genuine way. And it's exactly because of that I'm giving you the chance to choose your own truth, even if it means losing you forever." Emily sat on the bed for an eternity, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the frightening possibility of a completely different future. She was not Alex's sister. She was free to feel what she felt for him without carrying the weight of sin and prohibition. But would she be able to forgive years of lies and manipulation? Would she be able to separate true love from sick obsession? And most importantly, would she be able to trust again someone who had built an entire life based on half-truths? She took the clinic address from the drawer. Stella Morrison might have the answers she needed, or she might reveal even deeper lies. Either way, Emily knew she couldn't move forward without knowing the whole truth, however painful it might be. St. Raphael's Clinic was in the mountains of Lake Geneva, a place where the thin air and solemn silence seemed designed to heal wounds that ordinary hospitals couldn't reach. Emily made the journey by car, driving along the winding road while trying to organize the thoughts that multiplied like fractals in her mind. Stella Morrison was in the garden when Emily arrived, sitting in a wicker chair in front of an artificial lake where swans glided with silent elegance. At 45, she still preserved an ethereal beauty, but there was something broken in her blue eyes, a fragility that painfully reminded Emily of her mother in the last years of her life. "You're Emily?" said Stella without turning, as if she had sensed her approach. "You have her eyes, Lucy's eyes." Emily sat in the chair beside her, studying the delicate profile of the woman who had supposedly died years before. "She wrote to me about you. My mother said you corresponded." Stella smiled, a melancholic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lucy was my only connection to the outside world for a long time. Alex believes he's protecting me by keeping me here, but sometimes protection and prison are the same thing, don't you think?" "Why did he tell the world you had died?" "Because, in a way, I did die." Stella turned to look at her directly. The woman who married Alex Morrison no longer exists. What remained is just this." She gestured to herself with a self-deprecation that made Emily's heart ache. "What happened between you two?" Stella took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep, dark waters. "I was a ballerina when I met Alex. I danced at the Civic Opera House, had a promising career, dreams of my own. He saw me dance Giselle at a benefit performance and said afterward that it was love at first sight." She paused, her eyes lost in memories. "In the beginning it was wonderful. Alex can be incredibly seductive when he wants to be. Attentive, generous, passionate. But gradually he began to control small things, suggested that I stop dancing professionally, said he didn't want to share me with the audience. Then it was my clothes, my friends, my family. Always with much affection, much logic. He had arguments for everything." Emily felt a chill down her spine. The description sounded terribly familiar. "When I finally realized I was in a golden cage, it was too late. I had lost my career, my friends, my identity. I was just Alex Morrison's wife, an extension of his will. How did you escape?" "I didn't escape," said Stella with bitterness. "I broke. There was a night. He had prepared a surprise for me. A perfect dance studio in the penthouse, with mirrors, bars, proper flooring. Said it was so I could dance, whenever I wanted, just for him. And it was at that moment that I understood what he really wanted. Not a wife, but a porcelain doll to observe and control." Emily remembered the room in the penthouse, the clothes chosen for her, the sensation of being a specimen in a collection. "I attempted suicide that night," continued Stella. "Alex found me in time, brought me here. Officially, I died in a car accident. In reality, I've been here for 8 years, trying to rebuild who I am without him." "And my mother? How did you meet?" "Lucy began writing to me 3 years ago. Said she had discovered my whereabouts through old company records. She was dying and wanted someone to know the truth about you, about Edward, about everything." Stella picked up a folder that was next to her chair. "She asked me to keep this for you. These are all the letters we exchanged, plus some things. She wanted you to know. Emily accepted the folder with trembling hands. Inside, she found dozens of letters written in her mother's increasingly shaky handwriting. She read some quickly, her eyes filling with tears as she discovered thoughts and feelings that Lucy had never shared with her in life. One letter in particular caught her attention. "Stella, my dear friend, I fear that Emily is following in my footsteps. I've learned through contacts that she's working for Edward's son. The pattern is repeating itself. A Morrison man obsessed with a woman from our family. I'm afraid of what this might mean for her." Emily raised her eyes to Stella. She knew I was working for Alex. She knew and was terrified. She asked me to warn you if anything happened to her. She said that the men of the Morrison family had a pattern. They fell in love intensely, but didn't know how to love without possessing. "And do you think Alex is like his father?" Stella hesitated. "I don't know. 2 years ago, when he discovered our correspondence, he could have prevented me from continuing. He could have transferred me to a more isolated clinic where you would never find me. But he didn't do that. He said that if I wanted to tell you the truth, he wouldn't interfere." "That doesn't erase what he did." "No," agreed Stella. "But people can change, Emily. Obsession can transform into true love if the person is willing to give up control." Emily spent the rest of the afternoon reading her mother's letters, each page revealing deeper layers of pain, regret, and, surprisingly, hope. Lucy had found peace in the last months of her life, knowing that there were people who cared about Emily, who would look after her. When she said goodbye to Stella, the woman held her hand with surprising strength. "Be careful, but don't be afraid to love," she said. "Your mother made the mistake of running away from true love out of fear. I made the mistake of confusing obsession with love. Perhaps you can find a better path." During the journey back to Chicago, Emily felt something changing inside her. The anger was still there, but now tempered with understanding. Alex had done terrible things, but he had also done one thing that neither his father nor she herself had managed. He had told the truth, even knowing that it could destroy any chance of having her. She didn't know if she could forgive him. She didn't know if she could trust him again. But for the first time in weeks, she considered the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to build something new on the ruins of what had been broken. When she arrived in Chicago, it was already night. The city lights shone like terrestrial stars, and Emily wondered if Alex was somewhere down there, looking at the same sky, wondering if she would return or if he had lost her forever. Tomorrow, she would have to make a decision. But today, for the first time in a long time, she felt like the owner of her own choice. Emily spent an entire week without contacting Alex, a week immersed in her mother's letters, processing years of lies and half-truths, trying to separate. Manipulation from genuine love, obsession from true passion. It was like untangling a knotted skein, where each thread revealed a new layer of complexity. During these days, Alex respected her silence. He didn't appear at the apartment, didn't send messages, didn't try to force a meeting. But his presence was felt in subtle ways. Fresh flowers that appeared at the reception desk without a sender, the piano perfectly tuned every morning, a bank account in her name, the inheritance that Edward had left for her, with documents explaining that the money was always rightfully hers, not a concession or manipulation. It was on a rainy Friday that Emily finally made her decision, not because she had completely forgiven, some wounds would need time to heal, but because she understood something fundamental about herself. She didn't want to spend her life running from complex feelings. She had inherited from her mother the tendency to escape when things got difficult, but this time she would choose to stay and fight for what she wanted. And she wanted Alex. Despite everything, because of everything, she wanted to know the man behind the obsession, wanted to discover if there truly was genuine love, buried beneath layers of control and manipulation. She arrived at North Golden Capital in the late afternoon, when most employees had already left. The 36th floor was silent, bathed in a golden light that filtered through the large windows. She found Alex where she expected. in the music room, sitting at the piano, playing a melody that she recognized as one of the pieces her mother used to hum when she was a child. He stopped playing when he saw her, but didn't turn immediately. He remained with his back to her, shoulders tense as if preparing for a final goodbye. "I thought you had gone," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I almost did," admitted Emily, approaching slowly. "I bought a ticket to Seattle, thought about starting over there, but I realized I would just be repeating my mother's pattern, running instead of facing things." Alex finally turned, and Emily saw that he seemed to have aged years in that week. There were dark shadows under his eyes, an unshaven beard that suggested sleepless nights, a raw vulnerability she had never seen before. "I came to make a proposal," said Emily, her voice firmer than she felt. Alex waited in silence. 100 days, she said, echoing the words he had used weeks before. "Give me 100 days to know who you really are, without lies, without manipulation, without attempts to control my life. 100 days where you prove to me that you can love without possessing. And if I fail, then I'll leave and you won't try to stop me or follow me. And if I succeed—" Emily took one step closer, close enough to touch his face if she wanted. "Then we'll see if we can build something real on the ruins of what you destroyed." Alex closed his eyes as if praying. "Emily, you don't understand how much I love you," she completed. "I know I love you too, but love isn't enough if it doesn't come with respect, trust, and freedom." He opened his eyes, and there were tears there that he didn't try to hide. "How can I prove I've changed?" "By starting now, by giving me real choices, by letting me have secrets if I want, friends you don't know, moments that don't belong to you." Emily took a deep breath. "And by telling me everything, all the secrets, all the lies, all the ways you invaded my life." The 100 days that followed were the most intense of Emily's life. Alex kept his promise of brutal honesty. He told her about the investigators who had followed her for years, about how he had orchestrated her employment at the company, about every moment when he had manipulated her reality. Some revelations were painful, others surprising, but all were honest. He also changed in concrete ways. He removed any surveillance on her, gave her complete access to his bank accounts and business so she could verify there was no more financial manipulation, introduced her to his friends and partners as an independent woman, not as his property. Most importantly, he learned to step back. When Emily said she wanted to spend a weekend alone, he didn't ask where or with whom. When she decided to take a dance class inspired by Stella's story, he supported her without trying to get involved. When she wanted to redecorate the apartment, he let her choose everything, even if her choices were completely different from his taste. But these weren't just 99 days of testing. They were also days of mutual discovery. Emily met the Alex that few people saw, the man who anonymously donated to orphanages, who cried listening to music, who had nightmares about his mother's death and woke up calling for her. The man who played piano for her on quiet nights, who cooked simple dishes on Sunday mornings, who read poetry aloud while she painted her nails. They kissed for the first time on the 50th day, a slow, reverent kiss that carried years of repressed desire and transformation. They made love for the first time on the 70th day, with a passion that was as spiritual as it was physical, as if they were redeeming all the moments lost in lies and misunderstandings. On the 99th day, Emily woke up, in his bed, her bed now too, watching the morning light dance on his face as he slept. For the first time in months, she felt completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was finally living her own truth. "Good morning," murmured Alex, opening his eyes and smiling in a way she had never seen, completely defenseless. "Good morning," she replied, kissing his bare chest. "You know today is the last day?" He nodded, a shadow of anxiety crossing his face. "And what's your verdict?" Emily propped herself up on her elbow to look into his eyes. "My verdict is that you still have a lot to learn about loving without possessing, that sometimes you still try to control situations when you're afraid, that it will probably take years to completely undo the patterns you learned." His face closed slightly. But, she continued, smiling, my verdict is also that you're truly trying. That your love for me has changed from sick obsession to something genuine and generous, and that I want to stay and continue building this with you, one day at a time. The relief on his face was so intense that she had to kiss him to seal the promise. 6 months later, on the day she would turn 25, Alex proposed to her. Not with a ring hidden in an elaborate surprise, but with an honest conversation about what they both wanted for the future. She said yes, but with conditions. The wedding would be small. She would continue working, now as a minority partner in the company, and they would regularly attend couples therapy to ensure toxic patterns didn't resurface. On their wedding day, in a simple ceremony at the chapel where she had been baptized, now transformed into a space of healing instead of repression, Emily looked at Alex and saw not the elegant predator who had captured her, but the vulnerable man who had learned to love her with open hands. And when he kissed her, sealing not just their love, but also the promise